What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. As always, every Thursday, we go through our must-start and our must-sit players here of the week. We're going into week 4. I got 4 running backs and 4 wide receivers to talk about, and not a lot of time to do so. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button if you like the content at the end of today's video. But without wasting any more time, let's hop right into my must-start and must-sit players of week 4. All right, so we are going to be starting with the must-start players. We'll start at the wide receiver position, and the first must-start wide receiver is going to be DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. He gets a game this week against the Los Angeles Rams, and last week, DJ Moore, he caught 8 of his 10 targets for 78 yards in a loss to the Colts, and he finished as the wide receiver 33 on the week. However, this week's matchup against the Los Angeles Rams, it gives us a lot more hope that it could be a bigger day in store for him here in week 4 because this Rams defense currently ranks 31st against fantasy football wide receivers, which is the second worst in the NFL. Now, I know we haven't really had a big day from DJ Moore here yet, but it does seem like he's seeing a ton of volume. He currently has 28 targets through the first 3 weeks, which is tied for the 5th most in the NFL. And you include the fact that the Bears, they seem to be getting just a little bit more comfortable here offensively each and every week. There was a lot of positive signs of life there in the second half of the week 2 game, but I do expect them to continue moving forward, especially in front of a home Bears crowd here this weekend. So if you were thinking of playing DJ Moore in your fantasy football lineups this week, I think you can go for it. He's a player that I would be starting, and I think he can be a wide receiver 2 for us here in this week's matchup. Now, the second wide receiver I want to talk about as a must start is going to be George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He gets to play on the road at the Indianapolis Colts, and Pickens, he has failed to crack the top 24 wide receivers on any given week, but the underlying metrics for Pickens have been fantastic this year. Last week, Pickens posted a stat line of 5 catches on 7 targets for 57 yards receiving, and Pickens, he hasn't found the end zone yet this season, but he's currently commanding a 25% target share in this Steelers offense. Now, the matchup this week against the Colts, this should be great as Indy is super banged up on the defensive side of the ball, and they currently rank 28th against fantasy wide receivers, meaning there's going to be a lot of lighter coverage on Pickens here in this game, and there's going to be plenty of big play opportunities for him in this offense. Not to mention, Justin Fields seems to be taking some positive steps forward as a passer here with some proper coaching underneath head coach Mike Tomlin. So I would feel more than comfortable playing George Pickens in this week's matchup. If I'm playing him, I'm going to be viewing him as a low-end wide receiver too, but he's definitely somebody that I would be plugging into my starting lineup. Now, moving on to my must-start running backs, I want to talk about Brian Robinson Jr. for the Washington Commanders. He gets to play a game on the road at the Arizona Cardinals, and last week, Brian Robinson Jr., he rushed 16 times for 33 yards and a touchdown in the Commanders' Week 3 win versus the Bengals on Monday Night Football. Now, he additionally hauled in his only target for 4 yards, and it wasn't a super special day for Robinson. In fact, it was his worst performance of the year, but this week versus Arizona, it looks nice for Robinson, who will be without his backfield mate, Austin Eckler, in this matchup. Robinson has been very productive for fantasy football teams, and without Eckler on the field, I expect there to be way more pass-catching opportunities for him. Not to mention, this game is the highest projected game total of the weekend, with Washington as an underdog and Arizona being a bottom 7 matchup for running backs so far this year. So all of those things considered, this should be a great formula for Robinson to find success for fantasy football teams here in week 4. And I would strongly suggest throwing him into your lineup where you have him. If you do decide to play him, he is a guy that I am going to be viewing as a low-end running back 1 here in this week's matchup against Arizona. And now my other must-start running back, we're going to talk about Zack Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals. He gets to play a game on the road at the Carolina Panthers, and last week Moss, he rushed 12 times for 58 yards and a touchdown while catching 5 passes on 6 targets for 39 yards in Monday's 38-33 loss to the Washington Commanders. Now, this was the most opportunity that Moss has seen in a game so far this year, and it does seem like, even despite the loss, Cincinnati's offense could finally be hitting its stride as they head into this week's matchup against the Panthers. Moss has accounted for 70% of the rushing share and almost 11% of the targets for the Bengals, completely phasing out Chase Brown, and Carolina has been very friendly to fantasy football running backs, giving up an average of 26.5 fantasy points per game to the position. Cincinnati's going to be looking for its first win, and if they're going to go get that, Moss will need to be a big part of the game plan like he was last week. And I think if you wanted to throw Moss into your lineups, you definitely can. He's a player that I would be looking at as a safe running back to play here this week. Now that we've got the must starts out of the way, let's move on to the must sits. We'll start at the wide receiver position again, and the must sit wide receiver I want to talk about first is going to be Xavier Worthy for the Kansas City Chiefs. He gets to play a game on the road at the Los Angeles Chargers, and last week Worthy, he had 2 receptions on 4 targets for 17 receiving yards. He also had 3 rushing attempts for another 13 rushing yards as well. Worthy, he's just not seeing a ton of volume, and this week's matchup for Worthy is going to be rough. Los Angeles, they currently ranked 6th against wide receiver, and this game has a low 40-point game total, which is one of the lowest of the entire weekend, with Kansas City as heavy favorites here in this matchup. The game script leans toward a slow-paced, heavy offense from Kansas City as they grind out the lead and close the game against the Chargers in the second half, which obviously is not going to be ideal for a player like Worthy. Now, there's always a chance that Worthy makes a big play happen on his limited opportunities like he did in week 1, but it's just not a great bet to make here this week against the Chargers. So if you have to play Worthy in your lineups, I would try and find ways not to, but if you do, he's more so just a boom-bust flex type of play, and he probably has more bust potential than we'd like. And now the other wide receiver I want to talk about is unfortunately going to be Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts. He gets to play a game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and last week Pittman, he caught 4 of 5 targets for 36 yards in Sunday's 21-16 win over the Bears. Now obviously Pittman as a talent, very, very talented, a very talented player, but the passing offense in Indianapolis is severely handicapping his performance for fantasy football purposes. The Colts, they currently rank dead last in completions and completion percentage, and they are bottom 5 in passing attempts. Pittman is also working very close to the line of scrimmage, so even in the few receptions that he does get each game, he's not getting a ton of yardage with it, and if he does get any yardage, it's because he had to work very hard to get that. Mix in the fact that this game's total is supposed to be one of the lowest of the weekend, and Pittsburgh has been very good against fantasy football wide receivers. It's really tough for me to have any type of confidence in Michael Pittman Jr. here this week in week 4. And if you absolutely have to throw Michael Pittman Jr. into your lineup, I have to imagine there's some better options, maybe even on your waiver wire, than Michael Pittman Jr. But if you do, he is a boom bust flex play at best. And again, just like Worthy, there's probably more bust potential than we want. Now, moving on to my must-sit running backs, let's start with J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers. As I mentioned, the Chargers, they played the Chiefs this weekend, and Dobbins, he carried the ball 15 times for 44 yards and also caught all 3 of his targets for 10 yards in the 20-10 loss to the Steelers on Sunday. Now, we knew there was going to be a lot tougher matchups on the horizons here for Dobbins, who was a screaming sell high candidate after his first 2 games. And it really doesn't get any easier here this week against a really good Kansas City Chiefs defense that's only allowing 14.3 fantasy points per game to the position. Now, there are also a few other factors that make Dobbins a player probably better left on the bench. The first is that this game total is low, and the Los Angeles Chargers are 7-point underdogs at the moment, meaning that they will have to throw more to keep up than they've had to in weeks past. And the second is that there is a chance that Dobbins and this Chargers offense are without both of their star offensive tackles in Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater, as both of these guys are going to be recovering from a knee and a pec injury, meaning we're likely going to get a lot worse offensive line play than normal for J.K. Dobbins as a whole. So that said, Dobbins, he's going to have to overcome a lot of adversity in this one if he wants to be successful as a fantasy producer. And he will likely have to find the end zone in order to produce enough fantasy points for you to be happy about his performance here this week. I think if you can afford it, he is much better left out of your starting lineups and much better set on your bench. But if you do have to play him, he is a very low floor RB3 flex type of running back play. And now my final must-sit player of the day, going to the running back position again, it is DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. He plays against the Los Angeles Rams, and last week Swift, he carried the ball 13 times for 20 yards. He caught 2 of his 4 targets for 22 yards in the air in Sunday's 21-16 loss to the Colts. Now, on paper, this week's matchup is supposed to look good for Swift, but so was last week, and he continued to look bad last week as well. Swift, he hasn't been able to get anything going on the ground behind Chicago's offensive line, and not only has the production been horrible, but Roschon Johnson, who failed to get an offensive snap through the first 2 games of the season, actually led the Bears in rushing yards with 30 yards on 8 carries last week. And now as we head into week 4, the Bears are leaking rumors that Roschon is on tap for more work and that the organization would like to take a quote-unquote extended look at him in this week's game. So that definitely leaves a lot to worry here for DeAndre Swift. Swift was a player that I really liked the opportunity coming into the year, but that has quickly faded, and I do not like what I've been seeing out of DeAndre Swift. And he's definitely a player that we should be looking to sell, get off of our rosters entirely, but most likely just bench here this week. And I hope you don't have to play him, but if you do, this is just a low floor flex play at best. So there you have it. There are 4 players I am starting and 4 players I am sitting in this week's matchups. If you did like today's video, like I mentioned, hit that like button for me. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you are subscribed and hitting that notification bell. That way you don't miss any of our future content that comes out. And last but not least, make sure you go join our Discord. I do have a free Discord linked in the description. I'm in there helping you guys with your fantasy football teams, Dynasty, redraft, whatever you got. I'm in there answering questions 24/7, 365. It is the best place to get my advice. So make sure you go join that Discord. Like I said, free to join, so no risk in doing that. And with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today. So I will see you on our next episode. Until then, peace out.